We weren't rich, not even close, but we had figured out how to tread water without swallowing too much. I'd clock in at the hardware plant by sunrise, knock out a full day, then head to some back alley bar or closed warehouse for a freelance security consult. Cash jobs mostly. Just enough to fill the gaps the factory paycheck didn't. The wear and tear showed in my bones more than my bank account. Our home was modest, tucked between two units that seemed stuck in time, one always hosting a barbecue, the other always under renovation but never finished. But it was ours. It was built with late nights, budgeting apps, and the kind of tired that settles in your spine like cement. Camille used to work in marketing, good at it, too. But after her last job dissolved in some corporate restructure, she quit, said she was done being undervalued, and swore she'd find something better. That was over a year ago. Since then, her job hunt had evolved into long naps, online shopping, and too many wine glasses drying by the sink. I told myself she needed time. We'd argued about it a few times, nothing explosive, but enough to plant a seed of tension between us. I figured the resentment would fade once something came through for her. I didn't expect the something to arrive with leather seats and a panoramic sunroof. It was a Tuesday afternoon when it happened. I'd come home early from a canceled consult, pulling into the driveway to find it already occupied. A gleaming white Range Rover sat like a sculpture in front of our garage. Brand new, not a speck of dirt on it. I slowed to a stop, confused for a second. Maybe it was a neighbor's car? A delivery? I walked closer, keys still in my hand, heart starting to drum for reasons I couldn't name. The front door opened. Camille stepped out in a flowy cream blouse I didn't recognize. She didn't look surprised to see me. In fact, she smiled, tossed her keys on the counter with a casual flick of her wrist, and leaned against the doorframe like she'd just gotten back from brunch with friends. "Do you like it?" she asked, her voice breezy, almost playful. I stared at her, at the Range Rover, at the absurdity of the moment. What is this?" "It's leased," she said, waving it off. "Long term. Don't worry." I blinked. "Leased? How? With what money?" She smiled, tight-lipped and too fast, the kind of smile that felt practiced. "I have my ways." That was it. No details. No plan. Just that infuriatingly vague reply. I looked at the car again. The shine of the hood. The fresh rubber of the tires. The dealership tag still hanging from the mirror like it was proud to announce its escape from the showroom. I felt something twist deep in my gut. Not jealousy, not anger, something colder. Something that told me, without even knowing the details, that something had shifted and I'd missed it. She turned and walked inside like she had groceries to put away, leaving me standing on the porch with the sunlight bouncing off the windshield and burning the back of my neck. I didn't follow her right away. I just stood there, letting the silence sink into my ears. The world felt tilted, off balance. We didn't talk about it that night. Not really. I asked again, later, while she was cooking frozen shrimp in a sauce she read about on Pinterest. "Camille," I said, "we're already stretched. A lease like that." She didn't look up from the skillet. "It's handled." That's not an answer. She turned then, slowly, wiping her hands on a towel. "I told you. I'm not helpless. I found an opportunity, and I took it. You should be happy. We've got a reliable car now." "But how?" She stared at me, and for a brief second, I saw something flicker behind her eyes. Not guilt, not pride, just calculation. Like she was weighing whether I could handle the truth or whether she even owed me that much. "Finally," she said, "don't worry. It's not your problem." But it was. It was sitting in my driveway like a flag planted in soil I thought was shared. And in that moment, I realized I was no longer sure what parts of our life belonged to both of us and which had become hers alone. That night, after she went to bed, I stood at the front window in the dark, looking out at the Range Rover under the streetlight. It didn't belong here. It was too clean, too loud in its silence, too full of unanswered questions. My reflection in the window looked older than it had that morning. Tired. Smaller. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the payments, the insurance, the risk. And the fact that she didn't ask. Not even once. No conversation. Just arrival. Micah wandered out around midnight, rubbing his eyes. "Why are you up, Dad?" I tousled his hair and whispered, "Couldn't sleep." "Want to play cards?" I smiled. "Just one round, all right?" We sat on the couch and played a quick hand of Go Fish. He was bright, observant. He didn't ask about the new car. Not yet. But I caught him glancing toward the driveway, and I knew the questions were coming. As I tucked him back into bed, I kissed his forehead and lingered there a moment longer than usual. Then I went back to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stared again out the window. The Range Rover gleamed under the moonlight, and I said nothing. Not yet. It started gradually, the way rot creeps beneath paint. Camille's phone had never been something I paid attention to before. She used it like most people did, scrolling while watching TV, swiping through endless videos at night before bed. But lately, she started treating it like a ticking bomb. It was never left face up anymore. Always screen down, or clutched tight when she moved from room to room. Once, it buzzed while she was in the shower, and the way she flew out, dripping wet, just to grab it before I could glance at the screen. That was the first real confirmation something wasn't right. She started locking it. Changed her password twice in 1 week. I noticed, because she used to ask me to check her messages or play music through the Bluetooth speaker while she cooked. Now, the second I reached for it, she'd be on me like I was reaching for a weapon. "Why do you need my phone?" she snapped once, pulling it out of my hand before I could even blink. I wasn't snooping. I was just trying to turn off an alarm while she was in the garden. That's when I knew I wasn't imagining it. That's when it went from suspicion to certainty. Micah noticed too. He didn't say much at first. He was only 10, but kids pick up on more than we think. One evening while we sat at the kitchen table playing a quiet game of war, he looked up, those big brown eyes clouded with something more serious than I'd seen in him before. "Mom's always whispering in the bathroom now," he said, like he was trying to solve a riddle out loud. "And she closes the door even when she's not doing anything." I kept my face neutral, kept shuffling cards like his words hadn't landed in my chest like a hammer. "She's probably just stressed," I said, weakly. "Stressed people don't whisper," he replied. "They yell." That line stuck with me. I couldn't unhear it, even hours later as I lay in bed beside her. She was on her side, facing away, her phone dimming every few seconds before the screen came alive again with notifications. Silent ones. No buzz, no chime. Just light. Just secrets. Then came the receipts. Camille had always liked shopping, more browsing than buying, but lately boxes were arriving more often. Dresses still with tags, shoes stacked and unopened parcels in the closet. I found a Nordstrom bag tucked under the bed with tissue paper still pristine inside. "Returns," she said when I asked. I didn't like the fit, but the bags never left. The tags never disappeared. I checked the closet one night and found 2 identical dresses in different sizes, both unworn. We hadn't been out in months. Not to dinners, not to parties. She wasn't dressing for me. Then I started seeing charges on our joint card Uber rides at odd hours. Midnight, 2 in the morning. Destinations I didn't recognize. One of them was a condo complex across town. I Googled it. Sleek, modern, expensive. Definitely not a friend's house. I asked her about it. "I had a late interview," she said. "Some new startup. They hosted it there. Weird, right? Did you get the job?" She hesitated. "No, they didn't call back." Something in her voice cracked for just a moment before she caught herself, smoothed it over, and walked away. I didn't follow. That's the thing about doubt, it doesn't shout. It whispers. It lingers like fog in a room, thick enough to obscure but too thin to grasp. Every time I wanted to confront her, something stopped me. Maybe it was Micah. Maybe it was exhaustion. Or maybe it was fear. Fear that saying it out loud would make it real. That if I admitted I thought she was hiding something, I'd have to admit I didn't know my wife anymore. One night, I stayed up after she went to bed. I pulled the credit card statements, scrolling through each line with growing tension. Uber, Nordstrom, a strange online store I'd never heard of. Then another charge, listed as BR Holdings LLC. It was small, only $62, but it was the name that stuck with me. I'd seen those initials before. The next day, I called the card company, asked for the merchant information. They wouldn't give details, not without Camille's permission. So I started keeping records. Paper copies, screenshots, a folder tucked into my work locker away from our home. I didn't want to become paranoid, but every move she made, every deflection, every too sweet smile, every "it's nothing" muttered when I caught her flustered, fed the feeling that something was boiling just beneath the surface. Micah came into the kitchen one afternoon while I was reviewing one of those statements. He looked at the printout, then at me. "Are we in trouble?" he asked. "No, buddy," I said quickly, hiding the papers. "Just checking some bills." He nodded. "But before he left," he said, "I heard Mom say she's gonna be gone more. For work. She told someone it's starting soon." I waited a beat. "She said that to you?" "No. She was on the phone. I was in the hallway. She didn't know. He paused, then added, she sounded happy. I sat there after he went back to his room, staring at the table. The grains in the wood had never looked so sharp, so deliberate. The table had been the first thing we bought after moving in. Paid in installments. Built it together on a Sunday afternoon while Micah napped. Camille had spilled varnish on her jeans and laughed about it for a week. That memory felt like it belonged to strangers now. Still, I said nothing. Not because I trusted her, but because I needed more. I needed certainty. Proof. A reason that went beyond bruised ego and late-night guesses. I needed to be sure before I burned everything down. So I waited. I documented. I watched. And I kept my mouth shut. It was the kind of morning that should have been routine. The sky outside was dull, weighed down with the kind of gray that makes every sound feel muffled. Micah was already dressed, teeth brushed, backpack zipped up like he was ready for a hiking expedition instead of a dental checkup. Camille had made herself scarce since sunrise, something about a call she had to take, without noise, and the house felt quiet in a strange, watchful way. I almost took my car. The brakes were still squeaking a little, but it wasn't dangerous, just one of those sounds you learn to tune out after driving the same vehicle long enough. But Camille had suggested we take hers the night before. It's newer, safer, better, she said without looking up from her tablet. There had been an edge to her voice, like she was daring me to argue. So that morning, I took her advice. Micah stood next to me on the porch as I locked the front door. He was humming a little, distracted in the way 10-year-olds often are when they're thinking about everything and nothing. We walked down the path together, my hand resting lightly on his shoulder until we reached Camille's gleaming white Range Rover. It sat in the driveway like a monument to something unspoken. I clicked the key fob, and the locks chirped. The lights blinked. "All right," I said, reaching for the passenger door. "Let's go." But Micah didn't move. I turned back. He stood there, frozen in place, like his feet had grown roots through the concrete. The humming stopped. His hands tightened around the straps of his backpack. His eyes were fixed on the SUV, wide and glassy, like he was seeing a ghost instead of a car. "Micah," I said, my voice gentle. "Everything okay?" He shook his head slowly, almost imperceptibly. I took a step toward him, concerned. "What's wrong?" He didn't look away from the vehicle. I don't want to get in." His voice was so soft I almost missed it, but the fear in it hit me hard. This wasn't a tantrum or some random refusal. This was something else. Why not? But I crouched down, trying to get on his level, scanning his face for clues. "Is it the dentist? You nervous?" He shook his head again. "Micah, talk to me." He finally turned to face me. His lips were pressed into a hard line, like he was fighting against something inside himself. Then he whispered, "Dad, look in the trunk." For a second, I just blinked at him. The trunk. He nodded. His grip on the backpack was so tight his knuckles were pale. I stood up slowly. My pulse had picked up, drumming steadily in my ears. There was no logic to what he said, no reason to think something was in the trunk, especially something worth fearing. But he was trembling. Not like a child being dramatic, like someone who had seen something they didn't know how to carry. I looked at the car again. The morning air suddenly felt colder. "The keys are in the kitchen," I said quietly. Micah stayed rooted to the spot while I turned back toward the house. I didn't rush. I walked with deliberate slowness, the weight of every step settling deeper into my chest. The door clicked open, and I stepped inside, the silence of the house wrapping around me like a warning. The keys were on the hook near the fridge, exactly where Camille always left them. I picked them up, held them in my hand a moment too long, then turned and walked back outside. Micah hadn't moved. I approached the trunk and pressed the button. The soft click of the latch echoed too loud in the quiet morning. The trunk rose. Inside was the usual clutter, a yoga mat rolled up neatly, a shopping bag from Nordstrom filled with tissue paper, a pair of sneakers in a mesh compartment. But something was tucked beneath it all, obscured but not hidden well enough. A black gym bag. Small, sturdy, out of place. I reached for it, slowly, like it might bite. Unzipped it. Bundles of cash stared back at me, band-wrapped, packed tightly in neat rows like they belonged to a drug bust. It was a fortune. Tens of thousands, maybe more. Tucked beside the cash was a burner phone. Cheap. Ugly. Scratched at the edges. A pair of leather gloves sat underneath it all, folded like they'd never been worn. I stood there, paralyzed. The cold from the cash, real or imagined, seeped into my fingers. This wasn't a fluke. This wasn't an accident. And it wasn't new. I could feel it. Camille's car. Camille's insistence. Camille's vanishing acts and mysterious calls. She had placed this here for a reason. Maybe she thought I'd never look. Maybe she didn't care if I did. I turned. Micah was still watching, silent as a statue. His eyes searched my face, looking for a sign, panic, anger, fear. I didn't give him any. I just closed the bag slowly, tucked it back into place like I was resealing something rotten and sacred. I shut the trunk with a gentle thud. "Come here, buddy," I said, my voice quiet but firm. He walked over, his eyes still full of that unspoken knowing. I rested my hand on his back and guided him toward my car instead, unlocking the passenger door with a flick. He didn't ask questions. I didn't offer answers. As we drove to the dentist in silence, the hum of the road beneath us, I glanced over at him. His gaze was fixed out the window, but he wasn't looking at the scenery. He was thinking, processing. "You did good, Micah," I said, my voice just above a whisper. He didn't reply, but his hand found mine and held it, just for a moment. And that was enough. I didn't run back into the house. I didn't yell for Camille or slam the car door like I wanted to. I walked, slowly, methodically, like I was climbing the steps to something sacred and dangerous. Because that's what it was, wasn't it? A moment I could never unstep from. The air in my lungs felt heavy, like it had been traded for something metallic. And the way Micah looked at me, still frozen, still silent, made it even heavier. He knew something. Maybe not everything, but enough to be afraid. Enough to point me toward a truth he didn't want to say out loud. Back inside, the kitchen was clean. Still, almost staged. The only sound was the low hum of the fridge and the faint ticking of the wall clock. Camille's keys were hanging where she always left them, on the brass hook by the calendar she never updated. I stood there for a second, staring at them. Like if I touched them, everything would fall apart. I took them anyway. The moment I stepped outside, Micah's gaze met mine. Not with questions. Just waiting. I didn't say anything. Just moved to the rear of the car and clicked the key fob. The trunk unlocked with a soft pop, quiet but thunderous in my ears. My hand hovered over the edge before lifting it. The trunk rose slowly, smoothly. Everything looked normal at first. Surface level. There was a neatly rolled yoga mat, purple, the same one she used to carry to the studio she stopped attending months ago. A shopping bag from Nordstrom filled with pale blue tissue paper and what looked like a new coat still wrapped in its hanger. A pair of sneakers she hadn't worn. But underneath, tucked just far enough back that it wouldn't be visible at first glance, was a gym bag. Black, compact, unlabeled. I pulled it forward with a cautious hand, the nylon cool beneath my fingers. It was heavier than I expected. Not awkward, not bulky, but heavy in a deliberate kind of way. I sat it on the edge of the trunk and unzipped it. My breath caught. Cash. Bundles of it. Thick, compressed, and wrapped with tight banking bands. Some marked with stamps from banks I didn't recognize. The smell of money, real, not fresh from the ATM bills, hit me like a punch to the chest. Underneath the cash was a cheap flip phone, scratched and clearly used. I picked it up. It was powered off. Taped to the inside of the bag was a small sheet of paper with a handwritten list of numbers and names, most of which meant nothing to me. But one name stood out immediately. Bryce. I didn't need a last name. I knew. Beneath the phone and cash was a pair of gloves. Leather. Black. Brand new, but folded with care. Not for fashion. These weren't stylish. They were functional. Grip-lined. Unmistakably the kind of gloves used to avoid leaving prints. I backed away. My heart was thudding now, but I kept my face neutral. I had no idea if Camille was watching from a window. No idea what this setup meant yet. Drug money? Blackmail? A cover for something worse? I only knew that whatever it wasn't impulsive. This had planning behind it. Layers. And if this was the trunk, I didn't want to know what the rest of the iceberg looked like. I looked over at Micah. He hadn't moved. His small hands clutched his backpack straps like they were the only thing holding him upright. When he saw my face, he didn't ask anything. He just looked at me, eyes wide and brimming with something that made my stomach twist. Not fear for himself. Fear for me. Fear of what this would do to us. "Come here," I said gently, motioning with my hand. He walked over slowly. When he reached me, I dropped to one knee and rested a hand on his shoulder. "You've seen this before?" I asked. He nodded once. "You didn't tell me." "I didn't know if I was supposed to," he whispered. "I thought maybe it was just something she was keeping for someone." I exhaled hard. trying to keep my voice from shaking. And now, he looked at the gym bag, then back at me. Now I don't know what to think. I zipped the bag closed and tucked it back exactly where I'd found it, making sure everything looked undisturbed. I didn't know what Camille's game was, but I knew one thing. If she'd hidden this in plain sight, she either didn't think I'd ever look or didn't care if I did. Neither option felt good. "We're going to take my car today," I said quietly. "You good with that?" Micah nodded. He didn't speak again until we were halfway down the street, sitting in my old sedan with the squeaky brakes and the broken auxiliary cable that only played the radio. "Is Mom in trouble?" he asked softly. I hesitated. "I don't know yet, but she did something bad, right?" I looked at him. He wasn't asking as a kid looking for reassurance. He was asking as someone who already knew the answer and needed me to say it. "Yeah," I said finally. "She did something bad." He looked down at his lap and fiddled with the zipper on his backpack. "Are we going to be okay?" And that was the question, wasn't it? I reached over and took his hand, gave it a light squeeze. "We are. I promise." And in that moment, I meant it. Even though my head was spinning with questions, even though I didn't know what Camille was mixed up in, even though my gut told me this was only the beginning, I still meant it. Because now I had something I didn't have before. I had Micah's trust, and I had a reason to act. That night, after Camille left under the pretense of going to the store, I waited 5 full minutes after the door closed before I moved. I didn't say anything, didn't call her. Just listened to the fading sound of her car pulling out of the driveway and turning onto the street. It wasn't the first time she'd made late-night trips lately, and it probably wouldn't be the last. But tonight, everything felt different, heavier, sharper, more fragile. I knew she wasn't going for groceries. Not with a trunk full of cash and a burner phone tucked under a Nordstrom bag. Micah was in his room, the glow of his bedside lamp spilling under the crack of his door. I paused there for a second, hand hovering, unsure of how to begin this kind of conversation with a 10-year-old who had already seen too much. Then I knocked twice and eased the door open. He was sitting cross-legged on the floor in the middle of a half-built Lego city. Skyscrapers leaned against each other like exhausted sentinels, and tiny figurines were scattered around as if they'd abandoned their posts mid-battle. He looked up at me but didn't smile. "Hey," I said softly. "Can I sit?" He nodded, moving a small fire truck aside to make room. I sat beside him, letting the silence hang between us for a moment. I didn't want to startle him, didn't want to press, but I also couldn't ignore it anymore. You know how sometimes we see things, hear things, and we're not sure what they mean? I began, "But we remember them anyway?" He paused in the act of attaching a blue block to a tower. "Yeah." I picked up a Lego piece and rolled it between my fingers. "Today." "When you told me to look in the trunk, that was brave, Micah. I need you to know that. You trusted me, and that means everything." He looked down at his hands. "I didn't want to get anyone in trouble." "I know," I said, "but sometimes telling the truth helps people stay safe." He was quiet again. I waited. Then he whispered, "I heard her talking about it." I didn't move. "About what, exactly?" "The money, the bag, and the other phone." His voice was flat, but his hands were fidgeting in his lap. "She was on a call. I think she thought I was asleep. I was in the hallway because I forgot my math homework in the kitchen. I didn't mean to listen." "It's okay," I said gently. "You didn't do anything wrong." He nodded. "She was mad." She was whisper yelling. Said something like, "He won't know until it's too late." And then she laughed. Not like funny laugh, more like mean. I felt something sink in my chest, but I kept my expression steady. "Did she say who she was talking to?" He hesitated. "A name. Bryce. I think." That name again. I closed my eyes briefly. "You're sure?" He nodded. "She said something about him having the new lease papers, and that it was better with her maiden name. She said cleaner that way." The anger that rose in me was instant but quiet. Cold. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I just sat there, surrounded by plastic bricks and the echoes of a marriage unraveling in the voice of a child. "Micah," I said after a moment, "do you know what the word getaway means?" He frowned. "Like a vacation?" I smiled faintly. "Sometimes, but not always." He looked at me. "She said that too. On the phone. Something like, 'I'll make sure the getaway is ready.' I thought it meant a trip. Like, maybe we were going somewhere." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "No, but I don't think she meant us." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Are you going to tell her I told you?" I looked at him carefully. "Do you want me to?" He shook his head quickly. Please don't. I nodded. Okay, I won't. I reached over and pulled him into a hug. He hesitated, then buried his head in my chest. I could feel his small shoulders, tight with tension, trying to relax. It crushed me to know that he'd been walking around with this fear, this confusion, trying to make sense of a world that had changed without warning. You did the right thing, I whispered into his hair. I'm proud of you. Will she be mad? He asked. Maybe, I said honestly. But that's not your fault. Grown-ups make their own choices. He sniffled once and nodded against me. I sat with him like that for a long time, until his breathing slowed and his body softened. I guided him back into bed and pulled the covers over him, tucking them in like I used to when he was small and afraid of the dark. When I turned off the lamp and stepped out into the hallway, I closed the door behind me slowly, quietly. In the living room, I sat down and stared at the blank TV screen. My reflection stared back, tired, shadowed, worn. So that was it. Bryce Randall. The fake lease. Camille's burner phone. The trunk full of cash. The whispered threats my son had overheard in the quiet spaces between rooms. This wasn't just infidelity. It wasn't even simple betrayal. It was an operation. A plan. A full-blown scheme that she never imagined would involve our son's eyes or ears. But Micah had seen. He'd heard. He knew. And instead of hiding it, he came to me. She never expected that. I stood up and went to the kitchen, pulled open the drawer where we kept extra phone chargers, and found the old voice recorder I'd used back when I freelanced security cases. It still worked. If Camille wanted secrets, I could keep a few of my own now. And I'd be ready. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I lay in bed beside Camille after she came back from her so-called store run, her breath steady, her body turned away from me. She didn't speak. Neither did I. I kept my eyes on the ceiling, waiting for anything to feel familiar again. But nothing did. Not the rhythm of her breath. Not the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the sheets. Even the silence between us had changed. It used to be occasional, natural, but now it was tactical, like two people playing chess in the dark. At 4:43 a.m., I got up. I didn't bother pretending to use the bathroom. I walked out of the bedroom and shut the door softly behind me, then went to the kitchen, where I had stashed the burner phone and the black gym bag in a locked cabinet beneath the sink. I took them out, placed them on the counter like evidence at a trial, and stared at them in the hush of pre-dawn. I needed help. Not from the police. Not yet. I wasn't ready to detonate this thing without a strategy. I needed someone I trusted, someone who wouldn't ask stupid questions, who could dig without drawing heat. That meant Santiago. Luis Santiago had served with me overseas before his injury cut his military career short. Now he was deep in the private sector, running cyber intel and asset security for a firm that did work the government didn't always want its name attached to. We hadn't talked in 6 months, but I knew he'd answer. Especially when I used the phrase we'd agreed on a long time ago. I need quiet eyes. I texted it. 3 minutes later, he responded, "You have a line?" I sent him a photo of the burner phone and the sheet with the scribbled names and numbers. He replied instantly. "Run it?" "Yes." I added, "And I'll need verification on someone named Bryce Randall." Cross-reference with Camille's past job, 7 Loop Media. I made coffee and waited. Micah shuffled out of his room an hour later, rubbing his eyes. "You're up early," he mumbled. "I could say the same to you," I replied, handing him a slice of toast. He didn't ask about last night, and I didn't push. There was a mutual understanding now, unspoken but steady. He'd given me something fragile, and I was protecting it. That's how we'd move forward. By noon, Santiago sent me a data packet encrypted with his signature lock. I opened it on my work laptop with trembling hands. It didn't disappoint. The number on the burner phone was registered to a dummy account, as expected. But the call logs, those were very real. Over 60 calls in the last 2 months, most of them outgoing. Dozens to Bryce Randall. A few to unlisted contacts linked to known shell companies, one of which had a shaky trail connected to financial laundering and interstate fraud. Camille's name never appeared directly, but one of the lease agreements for the property linked to the SUV had been signed under her maiden name, Camille Dorsey. That was the linchpin. The mask she thought no one would look behind. I printed everything. The logs, the lease, the metadata from the phone, screenshots of charges, the list of names, even the timestamped GPS hits from the Uber receipts tied to addresses far from any grocery store. Then I called my brother. Darren worked part-time in the DA's office downtown. Nothing glamorous, mostly research and clerical, but he had access to people who understood how to get things moving. I told him what I had. I didn't ask him to act. I just asked him to hold on to a copy in case things got ugly. Darren didn't ask many questions. He'd always had a sixth sense for when someone was holding back something explosive. "Where's Camille right now?" he asked me. "At work, supposedly," I said. "She have a job?" "She tells me she does." A long silence. Then, "Send everything." I uploaded the files to a shared encrypted folder, then backed them up to a thumb drive and hid it under a loose floorboard in the coat closet. Paranoid? Maybe. But I was done assuming things would just blow over. That afternoon, I drove to a copy center 3 towns over and had the folder professionally bound. One for me, one for Darren. One I kept in my car, sealed in a manila envelope. Camille texted around 6, running late. "Don't wait up." I didn't respond. I sat at the kitchen table under the yellow glow of the ceiling light, the folder in front of me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was clear, focused. This wasn't about saving the marriage. That ship had already caught fire. This was about protecting Micah, about setting the table before the storm hit. Camille was planning something, an exit, maybe more, and she thought I was too tired, too trusting, or too preoccupied to notice. She underestimated me. I called Santiago again. "Can you track where that phone was last active?" I asked. "Already did. Last ping was 2 nights ago, East Side Storage Facility. Rented under, guess what, Bryce Randall. You want video pull?" "Yeah." "Everything. Entry times. License plate hits. Whatever you can grab. You sure you don't want me to loop in someone official?" "Not yet. I want to see how far she's willing to go first." That night, I waited until Micah was asleep and walked into our bedroom with the envelope in hand. Camille wasn't back yet. I opened the drawer of my nightstand and placed the folder inside. Then I sat on the bed. The wheels were turning now. The structure was in place. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. Control. Strategy. I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to break things or throw ultimatums. I was going to build a case so airtight she'd choke on her own plan. Because if Camille wanted to treat this life like a con, I could beat her at her own game. I didn't explode. I built. Quietly. Thoroughly. And when the time came, I'd strike. Not with fists, but with proof. Camille came home 3 days later, earlier than expected. It was a Friday. The sky was overcast, and I remember the exact time because I just poured myself a cup of coffee and had barely taken a sip when I heard the car pull into the driveway. She wasn't due back for another hour, at least. That's what she'd texted me. Running errands. Might stop by Camille's sister's place. Another vague itinerary and a string of half-truths. I didn't move right away. I stood there in the kitchen, mug in hand, staring at the manila folder sitting on the dining table like a loaded weapon. It wasn't even closed anymore. The documents were fanned out prints of call logs, burner phone metadata, the lease signed under her maiden name, and 2 photos I'd printed just that morning from Santiago's security feed pull. Camille, standing outside a self-storage unit, looking over her shoulder like she knew she was being watched. The door opened. Her heels clicked against the floor, sharp and deliberate. She walked in carrying a small shopping bag, her sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. I didn't say a word. I just waited. She took 2 steps into the room and stopped cold. "What's that?" she asked, eyes narrowing as they landed on the papers. I said nothing at first. Just reached out, tapped the folder, and slid it across the table toward her. "Read it." Her fingers trembled as she reached for the documents. She flipped through them slowly at first, then faster, call logs, screenshots, photos. I watched her face, saw the exact moment she recognized that her secrets weren't just suspicions anymore. They were facts, lined up in black and white, time-stamped and sourced. This is insane," she said, forcing a laugh that didn't land. "You've been spying on me?" "No," I said evenly. "Our son was afraid. That's why I started looking. And when I looked, this is what I found." Her mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. She placed the shopping bag on the floor like it had suddenly grown heavy. "You went through my things," she snapped, voice rising as her panic bled into anger. I shook my head. "No, Micah did, because he didn't feel safe. He didn't understand what he was seeing, but he knew enough to be scared. He knew enough to come to me." That hit her hard. Her expression cracked. "Micah, you made him your lookout," I said, voice quiet but firm. "He saw the money. He heard you on the phone. He heard you say, he won't know until it's too late. He heard you talk about a getaway. You think kids don't listen?" You think they don't notice when their mom is moving like she's rehearsing a vanishing act? She stepped back like I'd slapped her. Her lips parted, then closed again. Her eyes darted around the room as if looking for an escape route that didn't exist. I can explain, she whispered, finally. Can you? I didn't mean for it to get this far. What does that even mean? I asked, pushing back from the table. You leased a car under your maiden name. You used a burner phone. You had a bag full of untraceable cash and gloves in your trunk. You made dozens of calls to Bryce Randall, who, by the way, is now under investigation thanks to the shell companies he's been linked to. So tell me, Camille, how far did you think it would go? She sank into the nearest chair, her hand shaking as she brushed hair behind her ear. You don't understand. Then help me, I said. Help me understand why the woman I married has been playing two lives and using our child as a shield. There was silence. Thick. Pounding. She finally spoke. It started after I left Seven Loop. Bryce offered me consulting work. Said it was off the books but good money. Just research. Strategy. Then it became more. Handling cash, running logistics, things I didn't want to understand too deeply. But the money was good, and you were always working, always tired. I needed something. I needed to feel useful. I scoffed, the sound involuntary. So you signed fake leases and took meetings in storage units? It wasn't supposed to be forever. Really? Because it looks like you were building an exit strategy. I wasn't going to leave Micah, she said quickly. I swear to God. You were leaving me, though. She didn't respond. I took a breath, then leaned in. You crossed a line. And you didn't just do it to me. You did it to him. He's the one who found the bag. He's the one who had to ask me what a getaway was. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel moved by them. Not this time. I never wanted to hurt him, she said. Then why involve him? She was quiet again, folding and unfolding the edge of a receipt she'd pulled from the shopping bag. Her hands moved automatically, like she needed something to do. I was scared, she finally said. Bryce started getting pushy, threatening even. Said if I backed out, he'd make it look like it was all me. Said I'd go down alone. So you thought what? Hide it and hope it disappeared? I thought maybe I could pay it off and cut ties. One more deal, one more transaction. But it kept piling up. The car, it wasn't for me. It was part of the image he needed. Said it helped with legitimacy. You've been laundering. She didn't deny it. Just stared at the floor like the truth was too ugly to meet my eyes. I stood there, watching the woman I thought I knew unravel in real time. And then I said the thing that changed everything. I've already sent everything to my lawyer. And to my brother at the DA's office. Her head snapped up. What? This isn't just about us anymore, Camille. This is about Micah. About protecting him. About making sure he doesn't get pulled into something he doesn't understand. You do that to me? I'm doing it for him. Her breath came fast now, shallow and uneven. You can't take him from me. I'm not taking him from you, I said. You gave him away the moment you used him as cover for a crime. And with that, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her alone with the evidence and the consequences. The hearing was set for a Wednesday morning, a fact that felt more like a sentence than a date. The courthouse wasn't grand. Camille hadn't looked at me once since we sat in opposite corners of the waiting area. Her lawyer, a wiry man in an overpriced suit, leaned toward her now, and then with whispers I didn't need to hear to understand. They were working an angle, trying to shift the blame, trying to turn smoke into mirrors. Camille had filed a petition claiming I was manipulating Micah, claiming I was controlling, emotionally distant, even hostile. She said I had turned our son against her out of spite. But what she didn't realize, what she still hadn't accepted, was that Micah wasn't a pawn. He wasn't a weapon. He was a boy who loved both his parents until one of them gave him a reason to doubt her love. My attorney, Miss Harding, sat beside me, quiet, focused. A former child advocacy prosecutor, now in private practice. She'd reviewed the evidence I collected, the call logs, the lease signed under Camille's maiden name, the burner phone linked to Bryce Randall, the cash. She had copies of everything, including Micah's statements to our family counselor. She didn't posture. She didn't threaten. She simply prepared. They called our case at 10:04 a.m. Micah had already been taken to a private room with a court-appointed counselor. They didn't like children to testify in open court unless absolutely necessary. And I was thankful for that. You shouldn't have to see what was about to happen. We stood before the judge, a woman named Eleanor Kinley. Silver hair in a tight bun, piercing gray eyes, and a no-nonsense air that reminded me of a drill sergeant. She flipped through our file with the same care one might give to unarmed explosives. "Mr. Alden," she said, addressing me first, "you're requesting temporary full custody of your son, Micah, pending investigation into your spouse's alleged misconduct?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said clearly, voice steady. "And Mrs. Alden," Judge Kinley continued, turning toward Camille, "you're requesting shared custody, but contesting the allegations of misconduct and claiming your husband is emotionally coercive." Camille nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. He's turned Micah against me. He's been feeding him lies, making him scared of me." Kinley looked unimpressed. "We'll start with the petitioner," she said, gesturing for Miss Harding. My lawyer stood and walked confidently to the front. "Your Honor, the facts are not ambiguous here. We have documentation proving Mrs. Alden signed a luxury vehicle lease under a false name. We have digital evidence of her communication with Bryce Randall, a known associate under investigation for financial crimes. We have photographic evidence of Mrs. Alden entering a privately rented storage facility under that same alias. And we have a minor child who has expressed consistent concern about his mother's erratic behavior, late-night absences, and secretive conduct in the home." Camille shifted in her seat. Her lawyer stood. "Your Honor, we contend that Mr. Alden's narrative is built on circumstantial evidence and paranoia. The lease under a maiden name is not illegal. The communication with Mr. Randall was regarding freelance marketing contracts. And the so-called evidence from a child who is emotionally attached to one parent cannot be taken at face value. Children are easily influenced, especially by a parent who controls their environment." Judge Kinley held up a hand, silencing them both. "We will now hear from the family counselor who interviewed Micah Alden this morning." The court doors opened. A woman in her 50s entered, carrying a small notepad. She introduced herself as Ms. Caroline Eves, child specialist. "I met with Micah Alden for 40 minutes this morning," she began. "He's a bright, emotionally articulate 10-year-old. Initially guarded, but very clear in his responses once he felt safe." "Please share the relevant portions of your assessment," Judge Kinley said. Ms. Eves flipped to a page and read. When asked about his living environment, Micah stated, "My mom whispers on the phone a lot. She said Daddy is dumb and won't know she's leaving until it's too late. She said Bryce is her future." He also expressed fear when referencing a black bag in the trunk of his mother's car, stating, "I didn't know if it was something that would hurt someone, but it made me feel bad in my stomach." Camille's hand flew to her mouth. Her lawyer looked blindsided. Ms. Eves continued, "Micah did not appear coached or prompted. His language was authentic, and his concerns were consistent with anxiety and emotional distress related to perceived parental instability." The courtroom was silent. Judge Kinley tapped her pen twice, then said, "I'll be honest. I don't take full custody changes lightly, especially not on the basis of first hearing allegations. But this is different. This is a 10-year-old boy who is frightened, not because someone told him to be, but because he saw things that scared him and heard things no child should hear. Mrs. Alden, your behavior has not only eroded your credibility, it's endangered your son's emotional security." Camille tried to speak, but the judge cut her off. "Effective immediately, primary temporary custody will be granted to Mr. Alden. Mrs. Alden, you will have supervised visitation twice weekly pending the results of a formal investigation into the financial dealings, the lease agreement, and any possible criminal activity connected to Mr. Randall." Camille stood suddenly, her face twisting with disbelief. "You can't do this," she hissed. "He turned my son against me." The bailiff stepped forward. "You think this makes you better?" she shouted at me, pointing with shaking hands. "You think you win? You poisoned him." I didn't move. I didn't speak. I stood still as she was escorted out, her voice echoing off the sterile courthouse walls. Micah met me in the hallway 20 minutes later. He looked up at me, uncertain. "Did it work?" I crouched down and smiled. "Yeah, buddy. You're staying with me for now." He nodded slowly. "Is she mad?" "She's confused," I said. "But she's not going to hurt you. Not ever." He leaned into me, wrapping his arms around my neck. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just a win in court. It was the first real step toward peace. The letter came on a Tuesday. No warning. No return address. Just a plain envelope, slightly bent at the corners, sitting in our mailbox between a cable bill and a coupon flyer from a local pizza joint. I recognized the handwriting instantly, the slight leftward slant, the way she curled her R's like she was trying to make them prettier than they were. Camille had always been that way, concerned with appearances, with polish. Even now, after court orders and courtroom screaming and supervised visits she never showed up for, she still found a way to make her words look presentable. I stood there for a minute with the envelope in my hand, my other holding Micah's backpack. He was inside, probably microwaving leftover waffles and humming to himself. He'd been doing that more lately, humming. It was quiet and aimless, but it felt like hope, like healing. The letter weighed more than it should have. Maybe because I knew it wasn't an apology, not a real one. Camille had already missed her third supervised visit. No calls, no texts, just silence. A deliberate kind, the sort that presses into you with all its weight and asks, how much more can you carry before you collapse? I stepped inside and slipped the letter into my jacket pocket. I didn't want Micah to see it. He didn't ask about her as often anymore, and when he did, the questions were short and quietly padded with guilt. Is she okay? Or do you think she still loves me? I answered gently. Honestly, I always told him the truth, even when it hurt. Especially when it hurt. Because if Camille taught me anything, it was that lies might protect you in the short term, but they rot everything from the inside out. Later that night, after Micah fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table and opened the letter under the soft yellow glow of the pendant light. The first line was her name, scribbled in the top corner like a forgotten signature. Then, I never meant for Micah to see any of it. I stared at the words for a long time before continuing. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I just wanted more. You work. You sleep. You never notice me. There it was. The blade slipped between the ribs. I kept reading. Bryce noticed me. He asked questions. He told me I was smart, that I was wasting my time in that house while you stared at spreadsheets and read bedtime stories. He made me feel seen, but it was stupid. I see that now. The pen strokes got heavier midway down the page, the ink darker like she had pressed harder when she wrote. You win. I don't know what that means in the long run, but you do. You were right. About everything. I was running. I was building something behind your back because I didn't know how to ask for anything anymore. Then came the final line. Just don't make him hate me. I folded the letter once, neatly, like I was closing a chapter in a book I no longer wanted to finish. I sat there for a while, the paper still warm from my hands. It didn't change anything. Not really. There was no confession of crimes. No request for forgiveness. Just a weak acknowledgement, a backhanded way of saying I lost. But it wasn't a game. Not to me. Not to Micah. It had never been about winning. It was about trust. And she'd broken it. I placed the letter in the small fireproof lockbox under the stairs where I kept court papers, medical records, and a thumb drive filled with all the evidence I hoped I'd never need again. Some wounds don't need responses. Just time. And quiet. The next day, Micah asked if he could write his mom a letter. We were sitting at the park, his sneakers scuffing through gravel as he kicked a soccer ball back and forth between us. Why? I asked gently. Because I don't want her to think I forgot her. I nodded. Do you want me to help you write it? No, he said. I just want to tell her I remember. That night, he sat at the kitchen table with a blue pen and a sheet of loose-leaf paper. I didn't hover. I didn't read over his shoulder. When he was done, he folded it in half and handed it to me without a word. Do you want me to mail it? He shook his head. No, just keep it somewhere, in case she ever comes back. So I put it in the same lockbox, next to Camille's letter. It didn't matter if she ever came back. The words had been written, and sometimes that's enough. The days grew quieter after that. Not in a hollow way, but in a healing way. The absence of chaos was its own kind of peace. Micah started sleeping through the night again. I stopped checking the street for her car. I stopped flinching every time the doorbell rang. I started breathing again. One evening, Micah and I were cleaning out the garage. Old boxes, broken lamps, a flat basketball. He pointed to a stack in the corner and asked, "Can we throw this away?" It was a box labeled Camille Home Office. I looked at it for a long time. Not yet, I said. Okay, he replied, without pushing, because some endings don't need flames, just closure. And we were getting there slowly, steadily, one piece of silence at a time. The driveway hadn't changed. Same concrete path, same tiny oil stain from the time I overfilled the mower, same cracked corner by the rosebush that Camille always said we'd patch, but never got around to. But everything around that stretch of pavement felt different now. Lighter in some ways, heavier in others. The white Range Rover was long gone. Camille had returned it to the leasing company just before everything fell apart, before the hearings, before the letter, before Micah's silence turned from confusion into something steadier, something that resembled peace. Now, it was just my old sedan sitting there. The one with the squeaky brakes, the dented fender, and the rearview mirror that trembled whenever I rolled down the windows. It wasn't beautiful, but it was ours. Honest, dependable, like a stubborn truth you learn to love. Micah stood beside me as we stepped out of the house that morning. He was taller now, almost to my shoulder, which he liked to point out every time we passed a mirror. He adjusted the straps of his backpack and reached for my hand without looking at me. I gave it a small squeeze, and we walked toward the car like we always did. Then I saw it. A white SUV parked across the street. Not a Range Rover this time, something newer, sleeker. A Lexus maybe, polished to a shine that screamed showroom. There was nothing suspicious about it on the surface. It wasn't illegal to own a white car. But Micah's hand tensed in mine the second his eyes landed on it. His steps slowed. His head tilted just slightly, like he was bracing for a memory to crash into him. "You okay, bud?" I asked gently. He didn't speak at first, just stared. Then, softly, he said, "That color always makes my stomach weird." I followed his gaze to the SUV again. It wasn't Camille's. I knew that. The plate didn't match, and it was too new. But the resemblance was enough. The association was too strong. I turned to him, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said, "We're okay." That's not our story anymore. He looked at me, searching for something behind my eyes. Reassurance, safety, and maybe something deeper, confirmation that even though ghosts still lingered, they didn't own us. He nodded slowly. "Okay." And just like that, we kept walking. We got in the car. I started the engine, and the radio crackled to life with a voice reading the morning weather. Micah buckled his seatbelt, pulled out his earbuds, and said, "Can we do pancakes for dinner tonight?" "Only if I get extra whipped cream," I said with a smirk. He grinned. "Deal." As we drove off, the SUV across the street didn't move. It sat there, motionless, oblivious to the tension it had stirred. But the spell was broken. By the time we reached the corner, Micah was back to humming under his breath, tapping his fingers on the door like he was drumming a rhythm only he could hear. After dropping him off at school, I sat in the car for a few minutes before heading to work. My mind drifted. Not to Camille, but to all the versions of me that had once parked in that same driveway, believing in illusions. The man who wanted to believe silence meant peace. The man who looked the other way because confronting the truth might burn everything down. The man who thought loyalty was enough to keep something whole. That man was gone now. In his place stood someone more measured. Not harder, exactly, but tempered. Sharper. I wasn't living with one eye on the exit anymore. I wasn't waiting for the next line to slip through the door wrapped in perfume and late-night alibis. That chapter had ended. In fire. In courtrooms. In ink-stained letters folded with regret. And now? It was quieter. Not empty. Just quiet. The house was smaller without Camille's constant movement, her scent lingering in the hallway, her playlists echoing off the kitchen tiles. But it was also more honest. There were no whispered phone calls behind closed doors. No second-guessing every receipt in the trash. Micah had started sleeping with the door open again, and I'd stopped checking the locks twice every night. Healing, it turns out, doesn't arrive with fanfare. It doesn't knock on the door and introduce itself. It creeps in slowly, like sunlight inching across the floor. You don't notice it at first. Then one day, you realize you're standing in it. The weekend came, and Micah helped me wash the car. He wore my oversized best dad ever, apron like a cape, spraying more water on himself than the car. We laughed. We blasted music. He told me he wanted to learn how to make pancakes without burning them. I said we'd start with scrambled eggs and work our way up. That night, as I loaded the dishwasher, he appeared in the doorway. "Dad, yeah. Do you think Mom ever really loved us?" I dried my hands, walked over, and crouched down beside him. "I think she loved us in the only way she knew how," I said. "But sometimes love isn't enough when people are scared, or selfish, or broken." He nodded, chewing on the inside of his cheek like he was trying to absorb it. "But you love me different," he said. "I love you with my whole life," I replied. "And nothing changes that." He hugged me then, tight, stronger than I expected. We never brought up Camille again after that. Not in words. But some days, I'd catch him staring at the street when a white car passed. And I'd just walk over, say nothing, and stand beside him until he looked away. And we'd keep walking. The driveway stayed the same. But the story it led to? That was ours now. and we were finally free to write the next page, one truth at a time.